The question on everyone's mind is, will these concessions be enough? Will this make a difference to protesters? Your thoughts?
I think it will make a difference to some protesters, and I think it will play well in the wider population that supports the protesters. I think, though, for most protesters, anything short of Macron announcing his own resignation would not have been sufficient. So I think that the main question really will be, do the measures that he's announced, piecemeal though they might seem, will those measures be sufficient to kind of stem the widespread public support that the Gilets jaunes movement currently enjoys?
And what did you make of Macron's tone? He seemed to shoulder blame more than many people expected, saying while the violence isn't justified, the anger behind it is.
Yeah, he started off on a very firm note. He started off by talking about the violence, and then he proceeded to kind of emote about the situation of what he took to be typical Gilets jaunes. I think the fact is he doesn't really know who typical Gilets jaunes are. I think he still appeared out of touch, despite the rather misty-eyed presentation of himself that was given in that relatively short speech of around 13 minutes.
You touched on something that so many people still have questions about. It's not as clear-cut as if you disapprove of Macron, you approve of this yellow vest movement. Can you give us any more insight on who these protesters are?
Well, so there are numerous different sections of society, but it's predominantly the working poor and the middle classes who are becoming increasingly immiserated, who are looking forward as well to the next generation, looking at the prospects for their children and thinking, well, if things carry on as they are, my children are going to be worse off than I am. So I think it's an association of different people. Obviously, there has also been a certain amount of, if you like, infiltration of some of the street protests, particularly in Paris, by radical groups from the far left and the far right. But that really isn't the mainstay of the movement, and people forget that, particularly looking from abroad, that the movement is widespread throughout the provinces of France. So while all eyes are focused on the Champs-Élysées and the spectacular violence and public order policing operations that take place there, you've got fuel depots blocked, you've got roundabouts and toll plazas blocked. The kind of country is in a kind of a paralysis. And I don't think the concessions that we've heard Emmanuel Macron make this evening will go nearly far enough to persuade those ordinary people who are blockading the country essentially to abandon their posts.
And you're right, there is a big city versus countryside element to this movement. Could these changes that Macron proposed today help make a dent in the idea that his government really only works for the rich and those living in cities?
I think it was really interesting in the last part of his speech where he talked about opening a big national debate. And he presented this as though he himself were opening that debate, and he would be going out to consult with the people, and he would be talking to local mayors in particular to see what they could channel to him in terms of the kind of public discontent. But actually, the debate has already been opened, and it's been opened by the protesters, and it's been opened in a way that he didn't foresee and he didn't choose. So I think it's a bit late in the day to be talking about opening a debate. And I think also the detail was really lacking in that last part. This is a movement that it started off by protesting against one particular kind of tax, these green taxes. Then it protested against the wealth tax, which notably he didn't give way on today. And then it kind of broadened out to questioning the very legitimacy and fairness of the entire tax system very, very quickly. So really, this is a questioning of the legitimacy of the state structure, if you like, and the governing classes that for many people in France are running that state structure for their own benefit. So I really don't think the speech goes far enough in addressing those fundamental, if you like, kind of concerns about democratic deficit and legitimacy.
Right, and while he did shoulder some of the blame, he also said these are 40 years of malaise that have come to the surface, insinuating or straight out saying that this was a long time coming. So what do you think about the timing? Do you think that Macron waited too long to make the speech? It had been 10 days since the nation had heard from him.
Well, I think his advisors would tell you that he was trying to stay out of the public debate because his own person seems to be such a target of embitterment on the part of the protesters. It's become a really visceral. The anger is really viscerally directed against him, and in some ways, I think for the movement, he symbolizes in his person the privilege of the privileged and governing classes in France. So, he waited, taking another view of it, he waited because, he's counting on the arrival of Christmas, I think, diffusing some of the protests, and the longer he can string it out, the better it will be for him.
Oliver Davis from